Well, welcome to this month's August 2023 Ask Your Herb Doctor on KMUD Garberville 91.1 FM.
My name's Sarah Johannesson Murray.
My name's Andrew Murray. You're listening to Ask Your Herb Doctor, KMUD Garberville 91.1 FM, and on the web at www.kmud.org. We're also live streaming this program to our Western Botanical Medicine YouTube channel, so you can listen live right now on our channel by searching Western Botanical Medicine in the search bar on YouTube and click on the live stream. Tonight's radio show is part 7 of the endocrine system, but related to the continuation from last month's parathyroid gland physiology and bone health continued. So we're going to carry on the topic where we left off last month. And my name's Andrew Murray.
My name's Sarah.
We're both licensed medical herbalists who consult with clients with a wide range of conditions, and our website is westernbotanicalmedicine.com. You can visit our site to see a list of our organic medicinal herb tinctures, and our contact details are there also. Alternatively, we can be reached on our toll-free number 1-888-WBM-HERB. Our Western Botanical Medicine Twitter's account handle is at WBM-HERB, and our YouTube channel is Western Botanical Medicine. So links to both our Twitter and YouTube channel are also on our website. So like I said, we're going to carry on doing osteoblastic, increasing herbs that will promote the deposition of bone components, tie this up with another kind of go over of parathyroid hormone physiology, how vitamin D, calcium, and K2 are very important cofactors in enabling calcium to be deposited into the bone. And obviously things like magnesium and other soluble ions that are incorporated. And then let's not forget things like the amino acids, especially from gelatin and animal-rich bone broths, collagen, etc., are all very important. So many different herbs, many different products that are part of a healthy diet. Obviously, can't underestimate an active thyroid, underpinning much of the physiology for which our health depends. So last month, or let's just tell you again, the other subject that we're going to cover, for those of you who have heard of us, and maybe those who've tuned in for the first time, Dr. Raymond Peat was a guest speaker on our show for over a decade. We did, probably 100 shows or more with him over that time. And Dr. David Campbell in England is another doctor who's been very vociferous about the entire COVID fiasco. And we spent the last, 26 months with Dr. Peat covering all the glaring, obvious, erroneous messaging that was coming out of government to do with lockdowns, to do with masks, to do with the entire fiasco and the political financial involvement of vested interests to produce this quote unquote vaccine, which was nothing but. And over many, many months, we covered what we saw as scientific fact through many different professors and medical professionals who were raising the alarm about what was happening during COVID, and not just the people that were dying on ventilators, with Cameron Carl Siddell's part, which we came out with in the early part of 21, but all the other professionals, scientists of worldwide in all the different countries around the world who were interested in what was actually happening were sounding the alarm bells about mRNA vaccines. And Dr. David Martin was obviously a fairly vociferous opponent of it because of very vested interests. So we're going to bring out a lot of the kind of post-COVID. I think everyone, well, I don't know, maybe there are some people that still think we're in a pandemic. I don't know. So let's not just assume that we're not in a pandemic. But I don't think we're in a pandemic. And yes, there may be another wave happening here. And we've just known several people recently who got COVID and were over it in about 3 days, and it's not a big deal. So I think we can, I think I can safely say that the COVID pandemic is over. And obviously some people don't, and we still see some people wearing masks, and fear is a very powerful, keeps you very captive. So it's a powerful master, but we must learn to be objective with scientific facts that will help us to understand the situation that we're in. And we spent the last 2.5 years discussing everything around COVID and why we never thought it was a serious thing to begin with. But obviously, a lot of money involved in it, and Pfizer, Moderna, biotech, all the players can bring out how much money they've made and how many people have died, and just kind of leave it out there for you guys to make your own decisions based on the facts. So yeah, we're going to get into bone physiology, herbs to improve osteoblastic activity, and then we're going to cover a lot of glaring facts that have been released, not just here in the States. We're going to go over Rand Paul's Senate testimony to Pfizer executives, and as well as the agencies in England, in the UK, that are responsible for being accountable to the public, and how they are rethinking their strategies going forward should anything else arise, which I'm sure we all think there probably is going to be something else, because apparently it's fairly common, and zoonotic infections, etc., for which COVID was largely given the excuse how it started. But anyway, so let's carry on. I think we'll carry on and finish. Well, I had some more pharmacology about teasel root, and the teasel root is one of those herbs that we covered as a treatment for bone fractures, for osteopenia, osteoporosis, improving calcium uptake, etc., and generally improving bone mineralization. So I didn't really get too much in the way of pharmacology the last time we talked about it. Just to mention, Dipsacus has been used traditionally in Chinese herbal medicine to improve bone health. But basically, the main compounds are triterpenoids and iridoids, and they exert this biological effect of improving bone fracture repair, have anti-osteoporotic activity. They're neuroprotective, cardioprotective, anti-aging, and they also protect the reproductive system also. And then I had another article here, and I'm going to try and pull this up. I didn't actually have it printed out, but I had it pulled up here so I get fairly good access to it. They're talking about the polysaccharides from Dipsacus and their effects on osteoblast proliferation and differentiation in high glucose environments. And so there is a good paper by the PubMed, National Library of Medicine. It's a 2022 article published in March. It's called The Identification of Polysaccharides from Dipsacus asperoides and Their Effects on Osteoblast Proliferation and Differentiation in a High Glucose Environment. So I think the bottom line, if I just scroll down here, I rarely do this kind of thing, but hey, I just suddenly, one of those things I remembered that last month I was going to carry on with and actually bring out some information before we carry on about cascara and its effects on bone health, because we don't often think about cascara as a osteoblastic herb. We think about it more as a kind of laxative for constipation. But essentially, they're talking about for the teasel root that osteoblast proliferation and differentiation was definitely positively affected in their tests, and they said that the diabetic osteoporosis was a potential cause for osteoporosis by being diabetic and having a deranged glucose control, or rather no glucose control, with chronic exposure to high glucose, and how teasel root was very positively affecting that derangement. And like I said, osteoblast numbers were improved, and bone matrix components were improved, and basically that bone was positively affected in terms of its remineralization, and that it worked to offset the high glucose environment of diabetics, even when they were diabetic. So it had a fairly strong and profound effect on improving bone health. Obviously, one of many different compounds that will do this, and we've talked in the large part the last 2 months of many different herbs that have this osteoblastic activity, and or they prevent the dissolution of bone. Now, as I mentioned, bone every 7 years or so, the entire skeleton is essentially turned over, a bit like the fat cells that we have, that 4 years or so is about the average lifespan of fat cells, and that every 4 years you could, if you were controlled and focusing specifically on saturated fats and excluding polyunsaturated, you could within 4 years pretty well turn over your fat stores so that they would be principally saturated, which would be a much better environment for you, and less damage, oxidative damage could happen because they do not oxidize the same way polyunsaturates quickly oxidize and become rancid and have all their negative health effects. So the bone does the same thing in about 7 years, and obviously things like exercise and weight bearing have profoundly beneficial effects on bone in terms of strengthening bone. So obviously can't forget about good diet and exercise as part and parcel of a healthy lifestyle. And obviously thyroid health and suppressing parathyroid hormone and the other stressful mediators that bring about an increase in parathyroid and dissolution from the bone of its calcium matrix are things to be paid attention to. So with regard to cascara, imodin was the main compound that was brought out from the study that revealed it regulating bone remodeling by inhibiting osteoclastogenesis, which is the bone dissolution side of bone building and bone resorption, and it stimulates osteoblast formation. So bone remodeling is a physiological process in which new bone is formed by osteoblasts, and the pre-existing bone matrix is resorbed by osteoclasts, which is vital for the maintenance of healthy bone tissue in adult humans. Imbalances in this process can cause various pathological conditions, including osteoporosis. Imodin, a naturally occurring anthraquinone derivative found in Cascara sagrada and other plants, has numerous beneficial pharmacologic effects, including anti-cancer and anti-diabetic activity. Imodin is a potential target for osteoporosis therapeutics, as treatment with this agent enhances osteoblast differentiation and bone growth and suppresses osteoclast differentiation and bone resorption. So mice treated with imodin showed marked weakening of lipopolysaccharide induced bone erosion and increased bone forming activity. As we've covered many times on many of our monthly radio shows with Dr. Pete, lipopolysaccharide, or LPS as you'll see it in the publications, is very real and something to be aware of, which is why gut health is so important and rightfully foundational to good metabolic health. To quickly re-summarize then, lipopolysaccharides are large molecules consisting of a lipid, a fat, and a polysaccharide, a sugar, which are bacterial toxins. Now they're composed of an O antigen, an outer core, and an inner core joined by a covalent bond, and are found in the outer membrane of gram-negative bacteria. As thus, they're strongly implicated in decreasing bone health in humans, and these lipopolysaccharides make the gut membrane permeable, and so they cross the gut intestinal barrier and enter the general circulation, where they're most destructive to many tissues. Leaky gut is a familiar term to some and refers to the deranged permeable state of the natural barrier to macromolecules like lipopolysaccharide that should be there. Much of the initial attention lipopolysaccharide received in the early 1900s was owed to its ability to stimulate the immune system, for which the glycolipid was commonly known as endotoxin. Now, endotoxin robs the body of its energy supply as surely as an erosion in the stomach over many months results in anemia and a helpless, weakened state. So that's imodin and its ability to suppress LPS, lipopolysaccharide, and how decreased lipopolysaccharide basically would heal a previously leaky intestinal membrane or intestinal barrier. So when people talk about things crossing the gut barrier, there are obviously molecules that are transported across that are necessary because that's how we absorb our food. But there are larger molecules that shouldn't ever cross over, or antigenic components that are not designed to be brought over because they are quote unquote antigenic and will result in a kind of widespread immune reaction. So the gut barrier, like many other barriers, serves as a very specific function to prevent those things that shouldn't be brought into circulation. Okay, so Astragalus membranaceus, another Chinese herb, with a good long tradition as an adaptogen, and we've mentioned adaptogens and adaptogenic potential of different herbs to support the body's natural resistance to stress. So this is how we would normally describe an adaptogen. The text that I brought out here mentioned that astragalus stimulates fresh bone development, specifically for periodontal defects, and this would be handy for people who perhaps have really loose teeth and or periodontal disease, which again is a kind of quote unquote serious condition where the gums become inflamed, the gingivitis that can happen by bacteria being harbored underneath the gum line, causing a constant chronic inflammation and edema and swelling and boggy tissue, where eventually the tissue of the gum becomes loose and the teeth lose their secure anchor in the bone of the jaw. And, you get the obvious negative health effects of poor teeth and poor gum hygiene. So basically, one of the main things that came out of looking for astragalus as a candidate for bone improvement was for periodontal defects. And also, I mentioned last month Drinaria fortunei. There's a Chinese formula that uses both Drinaria and astragalus specifically for periodontal disease. But Drinaria has also definitely got its own place as a bone stimulating herb. Again, an osteoblastic promoter, something that slows down resorption, improves laying down of matrix in the bone, and improves general bone strength and architecture. So another study entitled The Inhibitory Effect of Astragalus membranaceus on Osteoporosis by Regulating Vitamin D and the Clotho Signaling Pathway mentioned that the spontaneous senile osteoporosis severely threatens the health of the senior population, which has emerged as a severe issue for society in general. The study confirmed that astragalus could inhibit the aging of bone marrow mesenchymal stem cells and improve the osteogenesis ability by regulating this pathway. The study provided a certain research basis for the therapeutic of traditional Chinese medicine on primary osteoporosis. Astragalus polysaccharides improve bone mineral density and microarchitecture of osteoporotic bone. They induce the structural and functional changes of gut microbiota, and the changed gut microbiota is closely associated with the improvement of osteoporosis, again, in a similar fashion to cascara and amodin's effect on decreasing lipopolysaccharide and lipopolysaccharide's ability to punch holes in the membrane of the intestine and allow bigger molecules that never should get across to cross. So they're saying that astragalus polysaccharides had a very similar activity in the gut too. And again, it brings out time and time again that not just you are what you eat, but that your gut is a foundation of your health. And so really very much paying attention to the things that you're eating and how you're treating your gut will have long-term effects on your overall health. Okay, you're listening to Ask Your Herb Dr. KMBD Garberpool 91.1 FM, and from 7:30 until the end of the show, the lines will be open for callers to call in about questions related to this month's topic of bone health and herbs to promote bone health and prevention of osteopenia and osteoporosis. We are also going to cover Dr. John Campbell's papers and all of his tireless work since it began on COVID, and the facts and figures that he's brought out, and what the UK government are doing about it, and Rand Paul's testimony in front of a Pfizer executive, and what that means to the whole pot of wax. Okay, so let me start with salvia. So salvia militarizer, excuse me, or Dan Shen, as one of the herbs that we're going to cover, wanted to look at Panax ginseng. Then I wanted to get into some of the citrus bioflavonoids, look at some phytoestrogens as mediators, and then a couple of other Chinese herbs, Sophora japonica being one of them. obviously I have things, some of these labiates, obviously for the terpenes, triterpenoids that they contain, for their osteoblastic ability and their antioxidant ability, things like salvia, rosemary, funnily enough, those are going to be what we're going to be covering. And then we'll get into some of the COVID figures, might intersperse some of the bone stuff with the COVID, and see what we get from callers. If any callers have any studies they have that they want to bring to light, that would be great. Otherwise, if you want to just comment on what we're talking about and keep it to that, that would be awesome. So the number is 707-923-3911. So from 7:30 till the end of the show at 8 o'clock, you're invited to call in 707-923-3911. So salvia militarizer, then called Dan Shen. The main compounds they found in salvia for improving bone microarchitecture was salvinolic acid. It improved the ERK signaling pathway, and it improved bone mineral density. The protective effect of salvia militarizer and its active components conferred a reduction in oxidative stress. And again, oxidative stress is one of those things that has many downstream effects. Obviously, dissolving bone and leaving bone in a weaker state is one of those effects. Obviously, tissue regeneration and repair is not affected well under oxidative stress. Oxidative stress from free radicals, from polyunsaturates, etc., that radically and rapidly rancify and cause oxidative stress are part of the whole melee of things that we do our best to avoid, and the body tries its best to avoid by its own antioxidant defenses, to mitigate the effects of just normal everyday life, which generates free radicals and other oxidant compounds that tend to disrupt and destroy things. So the oxidative stress then, displayed by the increase of antioxidant enzymes such as superoxide dismutase, catalase, the glutathione system, and a decrease in malondialdehyde, the biomarker of lipid peroxidation, were looked at. In Chinese traditional medicine, the anti-osteoporotic effect of salvia militarizer is ascribed to its action on liver and blood stasis as the main therapeutic targets defining osteoporosis in the Chinese system. We mentioned last month the Chinese system, a very poetic but definitely a scientifically proven system, described poetically, looks at bone health in a different way to the Western world, where they want to look at a DEXA scan, for example, to see how strong your bones are, see what the bone mineral density of your bones are like. They look at the bones as a different organ and have a different philosophy for treating it. Now, Dan Shen's activity treating chronic kidney disease has long been known with respect to improving the GFR, or the glomerular filtration rate. This again is a problem in oxidative disease processes. The basement membrane of the kidney can become damaged, and this is the portion that's responsible for filtering components out and selectively moving components into the urine to be excreted. But the damage that can happen from oxidative free radical damage can affect the glomerulus and decrease your GFR to a point where you can suddenly become a candidate for chronic kidney disease. Okay, so Panax ginseng is one of the next things I wanted to look at. There's so much has been written about Panax ginseng since it was first discovered, I think, in terms of its use to be employed by Russian space cosmonauts to improve their cognitive function, and also for the Soviet Olympic team when they were looking back in the 50s at natural products, which is actually a very long-term vested history that they have with plant material, because they weren't, I think, they're not saying they're stupid in any way. There's some brilliant scientists who come out of Russia, but I think they've, because of their economy has not been such a powerful engine, if you like the Western economies, and they haven't had the same amount of money to pump into science and research, etc., etc. So they've actually been reliant on natural products because they're in the environment and they don't have to create new things from nothing, as it were, from the wealth of their industry. But the Russians have done a lot on space research and Olympic performance using natural products. And obviously ginseng was one of those products very early on, both Eleutherococcus, which is a Siberian ginseng, but I'm talking about Panax ginseng, the Korean ginseng at this point. So the ginsenoside containing ginsengs, the ginsenosides or panaxicides, are a class of natural product steroid glycosides and triterpene saponins. And compounds in this family are found almost exclusively in the plant genus Panax, which has a long history of use in traditional medicine that has led to the study of the pharmacological effects of ginseng's compounds relating to improved bone health. The active components of ginseng are shown to be involved in modulating multiple physiological activities. So ginseng modulates blood pressure, metabolism and immune functions in terms of the chemistry. Ginsenosides are triterpene saponins, and most ginsenosides are composed of a damarine skeleton. So it's a 4-ring 17 carbon structure with various sugar moieties like glucose, rhamnose, xylose, and arabinose attached to the C3 and C20 positions. So the quality and composition of ginsenosides in the ginseng plants are influenced by a range of factors such as the species, age, part of the plant, cultivation method, harvesting season, and preservation method. For example, ginsenoside RF is unique to Asian ginseng, while F11 is found exclusively in American ginseng. Thus, the RF to F11 ratio is used as a phytochemical marker to distinguish American ginseng from Asian ginseng. And the overall saponin content in ginseng is directly proportional to its age, reaching a peak level at around 6 years of age, which is why the larger groups are so much more expensive than the 1 year or 2 year tail offered varieties. It just makes me think about here recently, it's just a fact of from food to gas, anything about how the price of ginseng has gone absolutely crazy. Saying there's lots of other different herbs, but they probably increased at least 130%. So not too sure about the retail environment where price increases maybe 5 to 8% or 10%, but the price of raw materials, I'll tell you now, has certainly doubled in terms of what we have to purchase in terms of material, especially certified organic material. Anyway, so most harvested ginseng roots are either air dried, while some are steamed at 100 Celsius for 2 to 4 hours before drying, which gives the ginseng a darker appearance known as a red ginseng. Now, the red ginseng has a unique saponin profile with emerging ginsenosides RA1 through 4, and then there's RKs and RSs 1s and 2s being likely the result of heat transformation and deglycosylation of naturally occurring ginsenosides. We've purchased white ginseng before, obviously, and then the red ginseng is this variety here they're talking about, and it's purely because of it's been subjected to some heat over time, which changes the composition of the ginsenosides as a result of the heat. The Chinese have so many different processes. Sometimes I don't really know that much about it. I certainly don't pretend to be any expert on it. I know the pharmacology of the product I'm working with, but they just make so many different types of processes for each individual herb that it's probably a lifetime acquisition of knowledge in its own right in terms of why they do it. There's always a reason for it, and that's what I do love about Chinese herbal medicine, not just the fact that it's poetic, it describes it scientifically in a beautifully understandable way, but yet they had this knowledge before the age of any of this verification, long before laboratories existed and gas chromatography, mass spectrometry existed, or any other technique to identify each peak as a specific compound. They knew that, soaking in red wine, for example, for Rehmannia glutinosa, it's a different compound. It changes the compounds in Romania that are specific, as opposed to straight harvested Romania root. They have products they do in black bean sauce, for crying out loud, that affect the product in a specific way. So just how do they know this? In the age of just orally translated information, how did they know this? And it's a bit like, well, how do they know how to build the pyramids? But they did. So I take it away that there is definite knowledge in the universe that there are people that are either divinely or otherwise inspired to pursue that. This knowledge is kind of otherworldly, and it's only generations or decades later that science has the ability to show what it's doing. Okay, so it's 7:32 now here on KMED Garberville 91.1 FM. From now until the end of the show, you're invited to call in with any questions related to the ongoing topic of osteopenia, osteoporosis, specifically female health, but obviously males suffer with decreased bone mineral density, but not quite as much as the women do, unfortunately. Or the other topics that we're going to get into later on, which we haven't started covering yet, some of the facts around the COVID pandemic. The number is 707-923-3911. Okay, so many of these ginsenosides can promote bone formation and inhibit bone resorption, such as those that I mentioned, the RB1, RB2, and RE. And the ginsenosides have the potential to be new drugs for the treatment of osteoporosis, and they promote fracture healing. So essentially, just to sum up the ginsengs, they improve bone mineral density, and they improve the bone microarchitecture and the biomechanical parameters.
And another way to describe how ginsengs work is that they lower stress hormones. They lower the cortisol that your body's exposed to. And cortisol can eat away at your bone and your brain and your heart under extreme stress. So they're interacting with cortisol, kind of like how pregnenolone interacts with cortisol and lowers cortisol levels. Ginsengs and adaptogens like ashwagandha and astragalus, they also act in that same way to lower the stress hormones so the bones can be building and repairing themselves at a normal rate instead of being leached of minerals and protein because of stress hormones, namely cortisol.
So several recent studies have shown that Korean red ginseng and ginsenoside specifically has the ability to inhibit bone loss in ovariectomy-induced osteoporotic rodent models, and also to inhibit bone resorption in cell cultures. I said earlier that I was going to talk about the other class of compounds in the citrus family. So citrus bioflavonoids. We had last year, and talked about it on several different occasions with Dr. Pete, discussed naringenin. And naringenin is a flavonoid belonging to the flavonone subclass, widely distributed in several citrus fruits, things like grapefruit, oranges, lemon, bergamot, tomatoes, and other fruits. It's also found in its glycosidic form, mainly naringin. Several biological activities have been ascribed to this phytochemical, among them antioxidant, anti-tumor, antiviral, antibacterial, anti-inflammatory, anti-adipogenic activity, and it's also cardioprotective. Naringenin and its derivatives have been assessed in bone health studies for their phytoestrogenic effects. And naringenin is a potent anabolic treatment for bone loss by modulating osteogenesis, osteoclastogenesis, and macrophage polarization. Remember, bone is not a static inert substance, but a dynamic fluid material, constantly undergoing repair and regeneration. Anabolism and catabolism in harmony, undergoing constant remodeling of itself by osteoblastic activity and resorption by osteoclasts. Okay, well, let's hold it there. I think we have a couple of callers on the line, so let's...
The first question is for me is, how does the California ginseng, Aurelia californica, stack up to the other ones in terms
Yeah.
of constituents?
Yeah. Okay. So its common name, California ginseng, is belies it. The truth of it's not actually in the genus Panax. So, as an Aralia, it's in the Araliaceae. All the Panaxes are in the Araliaceae. So that's the misnomer. So it's in the same family, but it doesn't contain any ginsenosides like the Panaxes do. The Panax quinquefolis, which is the American ginseng, or Panax nota ginseng, Korean, and Panax, regular Panax ginseng, which is the Korean ginseng. So there's three main Panaxes, and then there's Aralia, but it's not the genus Panax. It's a Aralia.
And so it has none of those characteristics.
None of the ginsenosides, no, but it's definitely used as a adaptogen. Certainly has adaptogenic properties for improving the body's resistance to stress, and does that through a different class of molecules that it contains that the other Panaxes don't really have.
And we do have that in our triple ginseng formula. So really we have 4 different ginsengs in our triple ginseng formula, but we can't call Aurelia a ginseng because it's not. Whereas Eleuthero root, it's a Siberian ginseng, and then you have American ginseng, and you have the Korean ginseng, the Panax ginseng. So the triple ginseng product has 4 different ones because it has the California ginseng.
Okay, I think we have another caller. Caller, you're on the air. Where are you from? What's your question?
Yeah, hi, I'm from Los Angeles. I was calling because I wanted to get some information on a question my sister asked me. She wanted me to find out if cancer is a cause of parasites in the body. And since you guys are talking about herbs, are there herbs or is it, is it safe to do a detox, from parasites? Because I heard Dr. Pete say it could be dangerous sometimes.
Okay, so do you have any particular parasite that you're thinking of that would be treated, or
No. It was just a question my sister had.
Yeah.
Some information she got. Well, I just wanted to see what was your opinion on that.
I think there's a lot of merit in having a rest, giving your gut a rest. In terms of parasites as such, I don't think it's actually that common that people truly have parasite infestations. Obviously, in children, threadworm and pinworm are very common, so they do spread fairly quickly throughout populations. Orofecal hand to anus type route of spread. But I think in general, intestinal parasites, you would pretty well know that you had a parasite infection if you truly had. I mean, any of those that cause any gas and bloating and distension or diarrheal symptoms, where you'd obviously be thinking that you had something. In terms of parasites that you may not typically be symptomatic for, but maybe just had some distension and or fullness, feelings of fullness, or maybe slight changes in bowel habit, I think many of those parasites that are common can be relatively easily tested with a stool sample. But I think those anti-parasitic herbs that we traditionally use, we actually make a product called Wormwood Complex, and that Wormwood Complex is specifically used for things like threadworm and pinworm and other intestinal parasites that you can get that may not necessarily be that symptomatic, but they will have an activity within the intestines, and that activity, as much as anti-inflammatory, some of the compounds in there physically inhibit the attachment to the intestinal wall that some parasites rely on to basically hold themselves within a constantly moving environment. So I think for people that like to do detoxing, like to do cleansing, and like to do anti-parasite type herbs or other modalities, I think it's not a bad thing. I think as long as you're not talking about long-term fasting, because we don't agree with fasting. I think if you still want to take juice, milk and orange juice, and sustain yourself through a several 3-day or 4-day, that's totally fine, but not to avoid food. So definitely, in terms of using black walnut or Artemisia absinthium or tansy or many of the other, what they call vermifuges, I think there's merit in it.
Okay, but you want to get it diagnosed, right? In a way, not just to do like a parasite just cuts. I mean, without knowing if you do have a parasite or not.
I think it's definitely good if you can. Yeah, of course. I think scientific information is always very objective, and it will guide treatment definitely, because not all parasites are going to respond to one particular antiparasitic. It depends on the mode of either attachment to the intestinal wall, or whether or not they're sensitive to juglone, for example, as one of the principal components of black walnut. So,
Oh, okay.
yeah, or you can get bacterial parasitism. It doesn't have to be a kind of a worm. There's many different types of.
I mean, and malaria.
Yeah.
Malaria is a parasite. So our wormwood complex has sweet Annie, which is effective for malaria. It has the Artemisia absinthium that Andrew mentioned, which is wormwood. It has the black walnut and the tansy. It has a mixture of different herbs that are antiparasitic.
Cascara too, great.
And Sarah, when you take the solution, the syrups, do you do them just like for a month and then that's it?
Well,
or a couple of weeks.
No,
They're-
What do you
they-
recommend?
Yeah, they all have specific dosage instructions on the label. And I
Mhm.
can post a link to that on the YouTube live chat if you are able to access that.
Yeah, I was on there right now asking the questions. I just still going through COVID, and you guys have been helping me out through it.
Oh, okay.
I really appreciate it.
Okay, great. Well,
Yeah.
thank you
Yeah.
for your support and thank you for listening.
Yeah, you're very welcome. I'm just gonna get the vitamin K2 because I finished. I normally take some, but I just want to know because I have a mild fever still lingering.
Right.
So I just want. You said it's okay to take some aspirin. So,
Yeah, with
I'll
the
go ahead.
it's safe with the vitamin K2.
yeah, we'll do. And order the other syrup and do that as well. Thank you guys so much
Thank-
for everything.
Yeah, thank you for your call.
Thank you for
And
your call.
be sure to get your friends down in your community far away listening to KMUD too for all these kinds of shows, because we need to get information out there. So get your friends listening too.
I will. I don't know if Treby's listening, but hi to Treby if she is.
Okay. All right. So the number, if you want to call in, 707-923-3911.
And we do have a question on the live chat. The listener was asking about marmalade and whether you can use fruit that has wax on it, or would it be better to just buy a pre-made marmalade? And of course, you don't want to eat orange peel with wax on it, but Dr. Pete was a big advocate of marmalade and orange juice, as many of you know. But the naringenin that Andrew was mentioning earlier is a potent antioxidant, anti-estrogen. And how I make my orange marmalade, because I cannot find organic orange marmalade in this country. If someone has found it, please tell me the brand. In England, you can get Dalesford Organic Farm or organic orange marmalade, and it's delicious, and it's made with organic Seville oranges. But what I do is I go to my local health food store and I order a case of organic Seville oranges that are available once a year in the winter, one season a year. And then I go ahead and make marmalade that way. So I can have lots of homemade marmalade. It's a lot of work, but it's delicious.
Okay.
And do you use the pips for the pectin, or do you add pectin?
No, orange peel has so much natural pectin in it. And if you cook it in a traditional way with how you make orange marmalade, it's a several-day process where you soak the peel, and it's a long recipe. But if you do that way, you extract all the pectin, and it makes a very thick marmalade without having to add any fruit pectin.
Okay. All right. Let me just quickly wrap up. I think we're going to get into some of this COVID facts and figures post-pandemic, but just wanted to remind you all about phytoestrogens again. And I think I'm slightly misunderstood by some people, perhaps, but remember that phytoestrogens occupy estrogen receptors throughout the body, but do not elicit estrogenic downstream responses like estrogen, only very weakly. So they protect these receptors from being occupied by endogenous estrogen, which is continually secreted throughout the body, especially in response to stress and inflammation, which is why progesterone is so protective, as it actively opposes estrogen. So this month, I looked at some of David Campbell's material. He's been a very vociferous advocate for people that are thinking, and he is a medical doctor in England, obviously board certified, all the rest of it, and he's been practicing for quite some time. But like many other scientists, he was doubtful that some of what was being said was actually the truth. And he's done a lot of different YouTube. So if you look at him, he's got, I think he has like 100,000. And what was it? Yeah, 1,000. Thousands of subscribers. I can't remember the numbers actually, but it's up there, and he's got hundreds of thousands of views. He's been doing this for several years now, just as a podcast specifically based on what happened during COVID. Say again? Yeah. Sorry, John Campbell. Okay. All right. So the Journal of Endocrinological and the Journal of Endocrinological Investigations 2022, published online July 2022, has a title: SARS-CoV-2 vaccine may trigger thyroid autoimmunity, real life experience and review of the literature.
Okay, let me just add a little tidbit here, please. Dr. John Campbell on YouTube, 2.84 million subscribers.
Oh, sorry. Okay, 2.84 million.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And he's a nurse. This is Dr. John Campbell.
Okay. All right. PhD, yes.
PhD.
Yes, he's a doctor, medical doctor, and a PhD. All right. So this is something I have thought about, because in the last month and a half, 2 months maybe, I know at least 2 people that have had thyroid problems, documented thyroid problems, that also have a COVID trigger. Now, he brought out in his papers, if you go take a look at his website, go take a look at his YouTubes and read more in depth, and I've got time to explain it right here. But essentially, what it's pointing out is that SARS-CoV-2 infection can be associated with destructive thyroiditis and trigger thyroid autoimmunity. More recent evidence suggests that SARS-CoV-2 vaccines may also be associated with permanent or transient thyroid dysfunction in susceptible individuals. The primary hypothesis is the direct influence on the thyroid gland by SARS-CoV-2 causing the euthyroid 6 syndrome, resulting in decreased levels of serum T3 and or T4 without increased secretion of TSH. In patients with COVID-19, the euthyroid 6 syndrome may be directly caused by the infection of thyroid cells with SARS-CoV-2. And then in the American Thyroid Association, Clinical Thyroidology for the Public, summaries for the public from recent articles in Clinical Thyroidology, the European Journal of Endocrinology, in 2020 states here that overall the results of this study indicated that abnormal thyroid function is common in patients with COVID-19, particularly hyperthyroidism from this immune attack of the spike protein and the thyroiditis it brings about, and that TSH suppression appears to be associated with higher levels of the inflammatory cytokine IL-6. Although more research is needed, these studies suggest that COVID-19 associated with systemic immune activation may possibly cause thyroid inflammation and result in hyperthyroidism or thyroiditis. Now, later on, this hyperthyroidism can be mistaken for Graves' disease, perhaps, and have a resultant thyroidectomy as a cure. It's not saying that these thyroid glands will return to normal once they've been activated by spike proteins inducing this reaction. But just to say that I think I've noticed 2 people here not long ago, I think they actually have this as the backbone of their thyroid disorder. Okay, so I guess we can get into the Australian mortality excess numbers and show also Rand Paul's Senate hearing and insurance companies essentially who are tasked with other companies that are tasked with data gathering so they can produce evidence to insurance companies that affect the annualized premiums that are charged for life insurance, and how these have staggeringly increased due to all the excess deaths. But I think we have a caller here. Let's see, it's 10 to 8. Caller, you're on the air. Where are you from, and what's your question?
Well, we're up here in the Eureka area, and the question, you wanted to know about some studies to follow, and one of them has been the ongoing studies through the Cleveland Clinic, 36,000 healthcare workers. They've been doing correlations between the more jabs that you get, the higher the likelihood of having
Myocarditis.
adverse effects and or getting COVID itself, being more susceptible to it, like as in ADE. And then there's also Dr. John Campbell. He's a doctor, but he's actually a teaching nurse, PhD teaching nurse in England.
Right, he's a retired emergency room nurse. I'm sorry.
Yeah, well, he's also been a teaching room nurse. He's a professor of nursing. He's a doctorate of nursing, and he teaches all the practical steps in nursing. I mean, he's been doing it for years. And to watch him evolve when he started his channel and see where he's come to and how careful he is with how he presents information is just, it's really, really an art. And he's gotten several strikes from YouTube.
I thought he was clever enough even to avoid that because he's very
he's actually had one or two videos taken down and gotten strikes, but they haven't threatened to shut him down. At this point. But yeah, he's got all kinds. And as far as the excess mortality, that's a guy named Ed Dowd. He's following mortuary statistics, funeral homes, and talking to funeral directors, and that's where he's getting a lot of his information as well. He's a guy that used to work on Wall Street and was involved in, not the Big Short, but at least in calling the 2008, 2007 Wall Street debacle. He called that and got it right. And since then, he's retired from investment, hedge funds and stuff. But anyway, he's the guy that's been coming down with this, with the excess mortality, and he's really one of the ones to watch and pay attention to. So
all right,
that was it.
Good. Thank you for your call.
All right.
Okay, so to get to excess mortalities from Australia, you know that Australia was well and truly locked down, was quite a draconian environment to be in during COVID. I think with the exception perhaps of the very west coast, which did seem to have a little more liberty. But a mortality rate is a measure of the frequency of occurrence of death in a defined population during a specified interval. Mortality rates take into account different population sizes and enable comparisons across cohorts and over time. So if you look at the data that the Australian government, was it perhaps, I'm not sure about the government, but someone in Australia presented this information based on facts from 2020, 21, 22 and 23 excess mortality figures. I know the excess mortality for 23 hasn't yet been finalized, but you will find at least a 10 to 13% excess mortality. So 10 to 13% of the population, folks, excess mortality. And I mentioned the Senate hearing that Rand Paul was involved in just, I think actually it might have been the 18th of August. It may have been today or yesterday. It was very, very recently. But basically in interrogating a Pfizer CEO Moderna CEO, and disclosed that Moderna paid the National Institutes of Health. How much do you think Moderna paid the National Institutes of Health? 50 million? 100 million? 200 million? How about 400 million? So Moderna paid the NIH 400 million. And you can go follow Rand Paul's investigation of this, and the outcome and the flack of this will hopefully get picked up in the news media in the days and weeks to come. But mentioning that the 16 to 24-year-old cohort who received vaccines, especially after the second dose of vaccine, developing myocarditis was completely corroborated with fact. So the whole myocarditis issue, the sudden death, the sudden heart attack, especially amongst young males and especially athletic males who suddenly were dropping dead, that had never been heard of, really. I mean, maybe 1, 2, 3 or 5 people around the world per year, but we're talking about excess figures in the thousands. And that brings me on. I don't think we're going to get time to do everything, but next month we'll carry on with these figures. But that just brings me to the fact that the vaccine adverse event reporting database that we mentioned when we were on the show with Dr. Pete The database for 2022, and it hasn't come out for 23 yet, there are 283,745 reported adverse events. Now, 90% of those are COVID related, okay, which makes about 255,000, so a quarter of a million. Now, if only 2%, not 1%, but if only 2% are reported, that's 50 times the amount. And again, this is why the MHRA in England has said that that's the Medicines, Healthcare Products and Regulatory Approach panel. Basically, their approach to patient safety requires a radical overhaul encompassing legislative changes on reporting and, in a system beset by conflicts of interests, changes to how the MRHA is funded. The Pandemic Response and Recovery All-Party Parliamentary Group UK, Failings of the Yellow Card System, Professor Carl Hennigan, Professor of Evidence-Based Medicine at the University of Oxford, Director of the Centre for Evidence-Based Medicine and an NHS general practitioner working in urgent care, stated, underreporting of adverse drug reactions to the yellow card system could be as high as 98%. So now, that figure then, if that was 98% and only 2% are actually reported, and that was a quarter of a million, that means that basically 3.7% of the entire population of the US suffered an adverse effect. So it's a 1 in 26 chance of getting an adverse effect from one of these shots. So why are companies still indemnified? And we've mentioned this on many shows. Why are they still indemnified against mRNA vaccine damage? Given the pandemic is over, why are they still pushing vaccines for young people? We'll have to leave it there, and I'll catch up with this again next week, finish off a few herbs that we haven't covered for the osteoblastic activity. And maybe by then we'll have some more information about the rollout of the Digital World Health Organization health certificate, and how vitamin D Alzheimer's is improved, and vitamin D in diabetes, and vitamin D, vitamin K2, how it sequesters calcium released by vitamin D administration and pushes calcium into the bone. But my name's Andrew Murray.
My name's Sarah Johannesson Murray. Thank you for listening this evening.
Yeah, for those of you who've listened to the show, they run every third Friday of the month. So September, third Friday of September, we'll be back on. My name's Andrew Murray.
My name's Sarah.
You can also visit our site, westernbotanicalmedicine.com. We can be reached on our toll-free number, 1-888-WBM-HERB. Our Twitter account is at WBM-HERB, and our YouTube channel is Western Botanical Medicine. So until the third Friday of next month, we'll be carrying on where we left off and hopefully bringing out more facts and figures, not just hearsay and our opinions. That's the way we like to keep it, have facts and science to back it up. Thanks so much for listening. Until next month. Good night.
Good night.